Philadelphia has many historic landmarks. Which of them was the most expensive and widely copied when it was built? Well, here's the hint. When most visitors went in, they didn't get out for years. Sean, when was Eastern State Penitentiary built and by whom?
It was built in the early 1800s. It opened in 1829 when this part of Philadelphia was just farmland. It was technically built by the state of Pennsylvania, by the Commonwealth, but it was pushed for by a group of mostly Quakers and other religious leaders who believed that people are inherently good, and if they could live in the right environment, they would look into their hearts and they would become penitent. This is the world's first penitentiary, a building designed to inspire remorse. And so they decided to put people in solitary confinement so they would look into their hearts and they believed they would become penitent. And all over the world, people paid attention to what they were doing in Philadelphia and they copied it. There are about 300 copies of this building all over the world, mostly in Europe, but also in all the European colonies, and some here in the United States. Virtually every prison built in the 1800s is modeled after one of two prisons, either after Eastern State Penitentiary or after Sing Sing in New York.
Was it successful?
No, it was not successful. You know, the people who built this building had high hopes that today you and I would be living in a society largely free of crime. They had that kind of optimism that they had found the answer. Today we know that solitary confinement is an extremely effective punishment. People hate it, but there's a lot of evidence that it's psychologically damaging. But this group of Philadelphians, starting right after the American Revolution, said, let's change the conversation. People have made mistakes. Let's think of a way to help them bring out the best part of their character. And that's become an enduring legacy in the United States of people who believe that even those who have made mistakes deserve a second chance.
There are unique features of the building. Let's start with the hospital.
Eastern State Penitentiary had a state-of-the-art hospital, an extraordinarily sophisticated hospital for a prison. So the hospital had an x-ray room and an operating room. They did all sorts of very sophisticated operations here all through the 20th century, including even things like plastic surgery, things you wouldn't think of.
There's also a synagogue. Tell me its history.
It's unusual for any prison in the United States to have a synagogue, but Eastern State had what we think is the first synagogue, starting in 1923. And there was a group of Philadelphians, Jewish leaders in the city, who were very concerned that the Jewish prisoners at Eastern State be given the opportunity to practice their faith in a respectful and complete way. And they raised money. They were led by Alfred Fleischer, and they built a lovely, lovely little shul here inside of the walls for a very small congregation and supported their religious worship.
There's lots of rather famous people who've been in here. Let's start with Al Capone. How did he get here?
People are often surprised that Al Capone was in prison in Philadelphia. Capone was traveling from Atlantic City back to his home in Chicago. The police here in Philadelphia searched him and found that he was carrying a loaded weapon. He had a .38 caliber revolver. And they arrested him, and within 24 hours, he and his bodyguard were given the maximum sentence, 1 year in prison.
What were his living conditions like here?
There is a lot of debate about what his living conditions were like at Eastern State Penitentiary. For many, many decades, we've heard the story that he lived in great luxury. And in fact, there's an article that supports that from the Philadelphia Public Ledger. A journalist wrote about the extraordinary luxury of Al Capone's treatment. But lately, we've been more skeptical. There's another article that came out the next day that says his accommodations were not very luxurious. In fact, he had a cellmate, so he wasn't even alone, didn't even have the privacy of his own room, and said that his conditions were fairly typical.
Tell me about the dog.
Pep was a dog who was sent here by the governor of Pennsylvania to live here at Eastern State Penitentiary. And there was always folklore that Pep had murdered the governor's wife's cat and was here for murder. That story always seemed a little far-fetched to us, and eventually we found that it wasn't true. The governor of Pennsylvania wanted to lift morale among the prison population here, and so he sent a dog from the dog training school for the state police here to raise the spirits of the men. And you can tell he named the dog Pep. And when they received the dog, they gave him an inmate number. We have his intake photograph, and he lived here among the men, and they considered him one of their own.
In 1971, Eastern State was closed. Over the next 2 decades, the massive stone building fell into disrepair. In the early 90s, historians and conservationists convinced the city to sell the property to a trust.
The city said, go ahead, take it. And so this group of people said, you know, we could try to raise $20 million and build a modern visitor center, or we could just open the building up and let visitors experience it the way that it is, as a ruin, and test and see if anyone cares. And so that's what they did. And that decision is still very much with us. That decision to trust the building, to let the building be itself. It doesn't need all sorts of high-tech museum exhibits. It needs some well-trained tour guides. Obviously, our visitors need to be safe. But we believe the building is inherently interesting. The first year that we opened, we had 10,000 visitors. Today, we have 275,000.
Oh my goodness.
We're growing every single year.
Tell me about the new mission of Eastern State.
Many people believe that criminal justice reform is the civil rights issue of our times. And we've begun to look at what's happening in our criminal justice system as an important part of the discussions and the experiences that we can have here on this property. And so we built a giant graph that shows the rate of incarceration in the United States history. The United States puts a higher percentage of its population in prison than any other nation in the world. We've built an exhibit, it's called Prisons Today, Questions in the Age of Mass Incarceration, that asks, how do we get here? Why do we have so many people in prison? And what are other models that we could be looking at to consider as alternatives? We've even begun to hire people who've been incarcerated as our tour staff. And yes, last year we rewrote our mission statement to say this is a core value of our organization, that we look at what is happening in the criminal justice system today as a key part of what we want to present to our visitors when they come to Eastern State Penitentiary.
An interesting part of Philadelphia's history. Next, visit a traditional Japanese tea house right here in Philadelphia. If you visit Shofuso during cherry blossom season, you'll feel as if you've been transported to Japan. This traditional 17th century Japanese tea house and garden was a gift to the American people in the 1950s. Today, it's a hidden gem. designed the tea house?
Shofuso was designed by Junzo Yoshimura, who is a Japanese architect. The house was built in Japan in 1953 and 54, and then exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, and then brought here to Philadelphia in 1957. It was decided to come to Philadelphia because there was not that much Japanese culture represented here, but this long history of friendship existed. So we were fortunate enough here in Philadelphia to get a magnificent piece of architecture from the Japanese. Shofuso was designed by Junzo Yoshimura, who is a Japanese architect. There are very few craftsmen alive now that can build structures like this. In Japan, there are carpenters and workmen who can work at this level. The house itself is built completely out of wood. There's a couple of metal pieces that hold it together, but for the most part, all of the joints are made of wood. There's some plaster on it, and then the roof itself is called hinoki bark. It's a Hiwara roof, and that's made up of 10 inches of bark off of hinoki cypress trees. Every 5 years, we have to bring craftsmen from Japan to repair the roof. It costs about $100,000 each time that happens. And then it'll cost about $1.5 million to replace the roof eventually, which I hope will be long after my time here.
Why are the materials so unique?
In the West, we don't really use materials like this for house building. The floors are made out of cypress, which is a very soft wood. And of course, we want to have hardwood floors here in the West because we wear our shoes inside. Japan is a floor culture, so everyone removes their shoes before they go into a house. The house was built as a museum exhibit, so it has several different types of architecture all attached. In Japan, normally structures like this would not be all attached together, but this way visitors can take their shoes off once and then see different types of architecture. The main rooms are 15-mat room and 10-mat room are shoin rooms, which means that they are desk-centered. So in the 17th century in Japan, anyone who had a desk was clearly a very wealthy and well-educated person. So this is a type of imperial architecture. Really the finest architecture that exists in Japan is what our main rooms are modeled after. We also have a tea house, which we do conduct tea ceremony here monthly for visitors to come and try out, but our tea house is a much smaller room. Traditionally, a tea gathering is a small gathering of friends, 5, 10 people. So the tea house is quite beautiful. It has very rustic appearance, but very, very high level of craftsmanship. So it's really kind of a journey of different architectural styles that are all connected in this one museum.
What exactly is a traditional tea house?
Well, tea houses were originally intended to give the sense of being just a little hut in the woods. Japan adopted the culture of tea from China, and it was because the implements are quite expensive. It was generally a wealthy person's hobby to practice tea. Once you go in to have tea, the doors and windows are closed, so you're just inside the tea house. The materials are beautiful but simple. So there's branches that are stripped of their bark. There's beautiful woven screens, but very simple. And then when you sit inside a tea house, you're there in the moment. That's one of the reasons why the doors and windows are closed. Your tea host is there to present hospitality to the people that they care about or want to enjoy themselves. So it's an opportunity to leave the outside world behind and just sit and be in the moment, enjoy the taste of tea, enjoy the taste of sweets, and enjoy the companionship of the people that you're with.
Right, lovely.
It's wonderful.
Who owns the house today?
The house is owned by the City of Philadelphia.
Oh,
We are a private nonprofit that operates the house on behalf of the city itself. We maintain the house, we maintain the landscape, and then we present programs to help the public better understand Japanese culture. We are the only site of this kind outside of Japan. We have our beautiful piece of architecture, Shofuso, here, and then the garden itself was designed for this landscape in conjunction with the house. So it's perfectly in balance. It's a true Japanese site, and it's unique to this space. Many Japanese gardens in the United States use elements that have been taken from Japanese gardens that are well known in Japan. Well, here our garden was designed for our space. There was already a pond here, and the structure and balance and proportion of the house to the garden are just in perfect harmony. So we have architecture and landscape working in harmony together here.
What is the significance of the cherry blossoms?
In Japan, cherry blossoms are a symbol of the fleeting nature of life, of any moment that we are in, that it's here and then it's gone. So in Japan, there's a culture around when the cherry trees bloom, people come out of their houses, they lay down picnic blankets, and they enjoy those moments. Cherry trees only bloom for a week and a half, and so it's a chance to get out and enjoy that moment when the cherry trees are blooming. Here in Philadelphia, we've worked very hard to tell everyone about the cherry trees that we have here. Our organization, the Japan America Society, has planted over 1,000 cherry trees in Philadelphia.
Is that right?
Yes. For me, the cherry blossoms really speak to one of the finest points of Japanese culture, and that is mindfulness. I'm a very busy person, and I tend to rush from one thing to another, even as I'm working here in this beautiful house. The reminder that cherry trees are here for a short time is a parallel to how every moment is just here for a short time. So I think for all of us with cherry blossoms, and tea ceremony certainly demonstrates that also, is that it's a chance for all of us to be reminded that the moment is now, that you and I are sitting here in the garden today on a beautiful afternoon, and this is our moment to enjoy being together and enjoy the garden.
Right. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
It consistently ranks at the top of the list of Japanese gardens in North America. Coming up, a 93-year-old Tora Tudor. Sid Moser was just 13 in 1938 when the Nazis burned synagogues and vandalized Jewish homes and businesses during Kristallnacht. He and his family narrowly escaped Germany shortly afterward. Sid has been teaching the Torah and sharing his story with generations of Jewish youth for half a century.
I grew up in Germany. I was born in 1925, and Hitler got into power in 1933, and we lived through the beginning of Hitler's power in Germany. I had to watch that the kids wouldn't chase me. That's what it was like. My uncles, who were in export business, and they had gotten us affidavits to come to the States. October the 3rd, 1940, which I consider the greatest day of my life, when I became an American.
What brought you to Philadelphia?
When we got to New York, my sister married an American, and he saw my mother was a tailor and all this stuff. So they opened a small dress shop in Philadelphia. That's how they made a living.
Was the American experience everything you thought it would be?
I'll put it this way. If I had stayed in Germany, who knows what I would have become? I don't know, because we're religious, and probably I would have become some sort of a bookkeeper, some garbage like that. This is a great country. You can become what you want. You have to work your rear end off, Yes, I had to go to school at night. I had to take courses after I worked to stay ahead. They didn't like my education. I had to take an exam for a professional engineer to prove who I was. But I did it by putting the effort in. This is a great country. When I talk to the kids about the Holocaust, I always say, there's always somebody who wants to take your freedom away, and you have to fight to keep that freedom. That's America.
Why is preserving your Jewish heritage of particular importance?
Let me put it this way. When my wife belonged to the Kindertransport, they had an association, a worldwide association, and they had different people, British and other people, talking about the Kindertransport and about all this kind of stuff on the stage. And then something occurred to me. I wanted to go down on the stage, I didn't have the guts to do it, and say, look around, look at this. 12 out of 50 of us, none of us were supposed to be here. We beat them, we're here. And that gave me a certain impetus. But when I teach the kids here, I don't know why I do this. I don't know what this force is in me that pushes me to stand with these kids and teach them. There is a feeling that I have. I can't explain it. Nobody can explain it. When I sit with my students, I read from the Torah, I translate it to them, I give them the melodies. There is something important that I'm doing. The idea is we must preserve our civilization, we must preserve our Judaism.
What does a typical day look like for a Torah tutor?
Every student is different. Some kids are very fluent in Hebrew, some are not. So you have to find what the strength is. Then we have to teach them what we call the trope, the musical symbols. Okay, I tell people here, if you ever go to Bar Mitzvah and you hear all these crazy melodies, they're not just crazy melodies, they are prescribed melodies. I take the scroll out, they have to learn how to read from the scroll, because it's different than in a book. The Torah is the law. You have no idea what it does to me. When I saw that pointer go, I would burst into tears.
Why is teaching Jewish youth important to you?
It's just there is something in the melodies that touches me. When I was in Germany at the time, we belonged to a Zionist organization. We learned all kinds of songs. Maybe that's where it's come from. It's for the love of the music, the love of the words, the love of the tradition. I don't know. I can't give you the answer. It's just something I feel I have to do. Oh, I can even read some of the stuff. Yeah. You put it here. Bayom Hashishi, Lisa Livnei Agat, Afar Ben Yish Da'avel.
Growing up, coming to services, I would be learning the prayers throughout school, but I never really grasped the true understanding of what each of the prayers were. Ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha. I mean, just from the first day working with him, learning from him, I knew this was going to be a much easier process because of him. He's very knowledgeable and just someone who you want to listen to every word he has to say, because each word, each sentence, you will get something out of it.
I have watched the care and the compassion that he takes with each and every student, and it's amazing to watch how he has taught them and the experiences that the students come away with and what they think about, not just because they're learning their particular Haftorah or Torah reading, but also the life experiences that Sid is sharing with them. This idea of one generation transmitting wisdom and understanding to the next generation is important. And I know that as Sid has worked with the students, it's not just getting them to chant the Haftorah correctly. He's also talking to them about life, and he's talking about them about some of his experiences, sharing some of his wisdom. I think sharing that wisdom between generations is very important.
Bahaya ki hirbataha lehit palel lifnei Adonai ve'lihi shomer et piha.
What an example of perseverance and survival. Coming up, more at Eastern State Penitentiary. We've learned that Eastern State Penitentiary had running water and central heat before the White House. It also boasted the first prison synagogue.
It's unusual for any prison in the United States to have a synagogue, but Eastern State had what we think is the first synagogue, starting in 1923. And there was a group of Philadelphians, Jewish leaders in the city, who were very concerned that the Jewish prisoners at Eastern State be given the opportunity to practice their faith in a respectful and complete way. And they raised money. They were led by Alfred Fleischer, and they built a lovely, lovely little shul here inside of the walls for a very small congregation. At its height was in the 1930s, but even then it might have been 30 or 40 people. The synagogue also served as kind of a community gathering place. And so we see photographs of Passover Seders. We have accounts of just sometimes people would come in from the outside and simply read the newspaper together with the men who were incarcerated here in the synagogue.
Eastern State was a Protestant place. What prompted a synagogue?
It's true that the people who ran Eastern State Penitentiary were Protestants, but in general, they believed that any kind of religious worship was good.
What happened to the synagogue after Eastern State closed?
The synagogue, like the rest of Eastern State Penitentiary, fell into complete and total ruin. The beautiful ornate plaster ceiling collapsed, the beautiful wooden walls rotted and fell away, and it looked like something you would see in World War II at the end of the war. It was a terrible thing to look at. So with the help of some very generous families here in Philadelphia, we returned the synagogue to its beautiful appearance with its ornate plaster ceiling and its beautiful wooden walls. And today it's one of the only spaces here that's been restored, but it is an absolute gem, and our visitors really find this space of worship still very inspiring to this day.
Thanks for watching the show today. Until next time, I'm Suzanne Roberts.